All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar. It is about the Melbourne market and it's designed for those that either have properties in the Melbourne market or are interested in buying in the Melbourne market. So my name's Ashley. I'm based in Perth, but I have investors all over Australia. And so I really like to research and find out the trends in the other states, not only just to help my clients, but also to help other people, other investors in the market. So joining me today, we have the leading property managers over in Melbourne joining me. We've got Kelly Marks from Marks Property Management.
Hello.
We have Vanessa Pierce from Northern Avenue Property.
Hello.
And we have Jess Ross from Vice Property.
Hello.
So thank you for joining me. These ladies are people that I hold in high regard over in Melbourne. I know that they have done extra training to support their investors and are an amazing support for those investors in the market. And I also find that we see so much in the media, we see so much in the Facebook groups, and quite often in the Facebook groups, for example, a lot of this advice and these comments that you see are personal opinions, and they're actually not necessarily professional opinions. And we all of us have them. We've got personal opinions and professional opinions on areas and properties and things like that. So I think it's really important if you are in Melbourne, are investing in Melbourne or looking to, that you really get that on the ground advice and trends that is happening, because it sometimes is a lot different than what you're hearing in the media. So we have got a list of questions we're going to start with. So I'm going to start with you, Kel, with my first one. And that is, what trends are you seeing in the Melbourne rental market, and how should investors position themselves to take advantage of these trends?
Trends. Okay, so myself, I'm based in the north of Melbourne. My core areas, I suppose, branch out from the fringe of Melbourne Metro and Melbourne Regional. So COVID has actually seen a huge shift in these areas. I'm seeing a lot of both investors and renters coming from the inner suburbs of Melbourne for lifestyle change, flexibility, working from home, and moving across to these out of suburbs that are on the fringe.
Okay. Vanessa, are you seeing like local investors coming in the market, or are you seeing interstate yet? Are you seeing any changes?
I am seeing interstate. So I deal with a lot of sort of, I guess, wealth creation groups and buyers agents interstate. And a lot of those guys are looking to come back into the Melbourne market, which says a lot for me. I can see within the next sort of 18 months, 2 years, there's probably going to be a huge shift back into Melbourne and I guess some of the regional pockets as well, because some of those suburbs seem to be coming up in conversation. So yes, I think for those that like to be a bit of ahead of the trend, they're starting to step back in, most definitely, from out of state.
And someone that doesn't live in Melbourne, I'm sort of hearing a little bit of that. There's a little bit of mixed, is that the next place to buy? But like what you're saying, I think it's very segregated with where. So the answer overall is yes, but only certain areas. And interesting as well, like with what happened with Perth, we've got a lot of people buying in the regional, which we never had before. So it's interesting you mentioned regional because that definitely is something that I haven't seen before in real estate.
Absolutely.
So, over to you, Jess. What are the key differences between Melbourne suburbs that investors should consider when choosing where to purchase? Like, are you seeing people buying based on the potential capital growth, or are people still focused on a rental yield? Like, what are sort of people really wanting?
Yeah, for me personally, I deal with Vanessa, a lot of referral partner groups, self-managed super fund clients. I've seen an influx of them for my business this year. So with the self-managed super fund clients, it has to do with return on investment, their purchase price, and obviously with newer builds as well. But investors should definitely consider the location like we just talked about. So the purchase price and the location, the first two things, obviously, looking at close to schools and transport and things like that. And I touched on this before with the girls in the corridors that I'm working on the north. We've had one of the biggest upgrades in our Northeast Link, which is 6.5 kilometres of an underground tunnel in Melbourne, which is going to take 40 minutes of car travel time to get to, workplaces, CBD. So there's a huge, big infrastructure being done here in Melbourne, big build, and investors really I have seen are grabbing these properties close to these upgrades, knowing that it's going to pay off, in a few years' time. So purchasing at a bit of a lower price, but going to get a really good yield. So yeah, looking at the location, definitely, the return on investment, and I find with all of our referral partners, it's always about the numbers, making sure that they do stack up. Yeah, the pinch, obviously, with the interest rate rises, which we've all felt with the banks and things like that. I think we're at our most pressured for investors and our most hardest time that I've seen in many, many years. But it's not going to be forever. So yeah, looking at those numbers and those locations are the first and foremost.
So if location first, then price, does anyone get fixated? Do investors get fixated on block size? Because over in Perth, people are fixated on minimum 700 square meters and things like that. Are you noticing that?
Not too much on the block size. I think it's just more about the rental return and how it's going to stack up, the type of tenant, and how long is it going to take for them to get to work, and the types of tenants, if they're going to be traveling to work. For Kelly, she's a bit more out in families and things like that, whereas I'm more the professional people that are in closer to the CBD. So a bit of the higher numbers, sort of between your $700 to $900 a week, whereas the girls are a bit further out with your demographic for the everyday families. So it's really about how much they're going to be spending on purchasing and how much they're going to get for their rental return, but then also looking at the infrastructure and what's happening around in Melbourne. There's so many changes. So freeway upgrades, access to the hospitals, access to the airports and things like that. There's a lot of infrastructure change that's happening around, I guess you could say, our 30K radius, girls, of the CBD.
Absolutely.
So between a circle, a 30K radius for an investor to look, I would be personally looking at what changes are happening here in Melbourne. And if they're going to secure a build or something out a little bit further, what is the return on the investment going to be, and the growth for them in a few years' time when all these upgrades are finished?
Yeah,
I'm
amazing.
probably seeing two different types of groups of investors at the moment. Those ones that are fixated on the block size for possible redevelopment in the future. But then I've got another group of investors that prefer that no fuss, no maintenance of the new build. So there's probably two different types of investors at the moment, and especially through the north, there is so much land development, new estates coming along Sydney Road, the Hume Highway, again bordering that metro regional fringe. That investors with the SMSF, the self-managed super funds, tend to, I find, in these areas, go for those new builds.
And what about you, Vanessa? Like, what are you seeing the trend in your area?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sort of on that borderline, sort of where the north sort of hits the outer as well. In very, very similar. You do tend to get the larger family blocks heading out towards the north, but I'm finding a lot, like I've had one recently where people are still wanting the space out there as well. Single people moving into those areas, they're still working from home, so they want the extra bedroom. And like what Jess and Kelly have said, there's so much growth. And those plans are really accessible through council as well. If you look at the plans, with the Northeast Link, even through the Northern Corridor, say from Wollert all the way basically up to Kilmore, which is completely regional. There are huge growth plans for all of those sectors, and there's ones out in the west as well, which are similar. So I guess it comes down to how long they're wanting to hold the property for. I guess with those new builds, you have to be prepared to, I guess, hold them for a little bit longer, or like what Kelly said, people are wanting something a little bit. They're wanting the larger block further in so they can redevelop to, I guess, that townhouse or even granny flat. There's that coming up as well. So there's a lot of options in Melbourne. We have the greenfield estates, we have infill. There's so much. I think it comes down to people's budgets. Where it comes down to the yields. Apartments are yielding really, really well in the inner city ring, but again, is known for having less capital growth. So it comes down to their game plan. So
right. Excellent. Next minute, Ashley is investing in Melbourne and giving you all a call. Now let's jump over to the legislation, because you guys have had some changes in your compliance. And as someone who doesn't live in Melbourne, and so only seeing and hearing things from the outside, I was actually looking at this legislation, or these new compliance that you had come through. And I have to admit, when I looked at it, I was thinking, this is all good. This is actually good, fair compliance checklists that are in place. But I did hear that there was a bit of, I guess, commotion with investors getting out of the market because of this compliance, where I looked at it and thought, well, that should have just been a stock standard thing in place with investments. So can we just have a little bit of a chat about the new legislation and compliance? Is this good for landlords? Is it fair in your opinion? And is it going to attract or detract investors? Let's go with Kel. Let's start off with you.
Honestly, I see both sides of it. So I suppose when they initially brought this in, there was a big, as you said, Ash, a big hoo-ha about it, a lot of investors exiting the market. From what I saw, they were long-term investors with older style properties that didn't regularly maintain and probably upkeep their properties. But on the flip side, you probably had renters in those properties that paid a lower rent, knowing that it's okay, the tap's dripping a little bit, that's okay, it doesn't bother me. The light might flicker, that doesn't bother me. But I suppose it went hand in hand. They had lower rent with the expectation that the owner doesn't always attend to things as they should. They brought this in. A lot of owners weren't happy with that because there was a lot of upgrades that needed to be done, especially with electrical mains. Once we've probably through the initial part of it, so your gas and electrical is completed every 2 years and smoke alarms annually. Once we've been through that first cycle and electricians and plumbers, I guess, have quoted on what needs to be done and that has been initiated, it's actually, I find it's calmed down quite a lot. And investors, I suppose, are not happy about it, but they've learnt and understood why it's so important to update and maintain these properties.
And so over to you, Jess. So if these new this new compliance is in and investors are buying a property, do you know whether it's the seller's responsibility to have this compliance in order, or is it just if the investor chooses to buy the property and rent it out, they are responsible for checking in and making sure it's all up to date?
Yeah, so some of our buyers agents recently have approached us and saying, we're looking at this property, we're wondering, who do you use for your compliance, gas and safety checks? So it's been really nice and refreshing that they've actually taken the consideration to ask us before putting it all on the purchaser and then putting it on the property manager. So it comes down to the seller doing their due diligence and whoever they're purchasing through. But it also comes down to the fact that while these changes have been scary and the media has hyped it up, I honestly believe that it just has come down to a poor way of getting the message across about the changes, because in a short period of time, in the last 12 months, I have done so many compliance checks and recommendations to landlords, and I have found a switchboard upgrade, if it's there, it has to be done. There's no fighting it. And us girls have talked about this. It is what it is. We don't make the rules. We're here to help facilitate the journey. And even for the older landlords and the older properties that have had 20 years of no maintenance, you either want to stick with the journey and continue to roll out and collect an income, or you don't, but you need to make this choice, So we haven't seen too much of a pushback in the last 12 months, but at the start it was very hairy. And I think the ones that did sell up were just not given the message and the support enough. And it comes down to experience, knowledge, checking in with regular trades, having conversations. Like I hosted a tradie brekkie recently. I had compliance people and my old sparkies and my plumbers there collectively to gain more information to help investors. Because at the end of the day, if we can get a little bit more information for these investors, it helps them make a informed decision. And it's not very expensive. You might be 1K or 1,500 for a switchboard upgrade, but then you're not going to have wires tripping and tenants calling. So it's like it's goes hand in hand. Do you want ongoing maintenance issues, or did you want to spend that little bit of money and be not in charge with penalties? You know what I mean? There's big fines for not being compliant. So but in terms of buying and selling, it comes down to that process, and it's nice to see some buyers agents and people actually keen to get a bit more of an understanding of, okay, if I purchase this place, roughly what I'm up for, $2,000 to make it compliant, done deal, you know, and get on with the journey.
Yeah, amazing. Now, I just want to quickly jump in and just mention, for those that are here watching live, if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will monitor that as well and ask the ladies the questions at the end. So feel free to do that. The next question for you, Vanessa, how can investors attract quality tenants? Are there things that you're noticing that tenants are prioritizing? Are you finding that at the moment everyone's wanting baths, air cons,
Air conditioning.
air conditioner?
That's it. Look, there's
Hot
like,
today.
there are some, look, as it's coming into summer now, it's really hot here in Melbourne. Like, the thing is with Melbourne, we get really, really cold, and we get really, really hot as well. So heating is a minimum standard here in Victoria anyway, but you know that's the thing, you know, if you're purchasing an older property and you need to look at the heating, just put a split system in, because having both is definitely on people's lists. In terms of attracting the right renters, I think that comes down to how you market the property as well, and keeping it well maintained. If you want the best quality renters, you need to be prepared to maintain your property. It's, you know, it's the cost of doing business with property. It's not a set and forget sort of investment. So having it kept well maintained, also marketing the property, for me, it's a non-negotiable with professional photos, making sure it's neat and tidy. You know, good quality renters are going to notice if we're trying to lease the property with long grass or things not fixed. So just keeping on top of those. And yeah, you know, like really basic things, fly screens on windows, air conditioning. And we're speaking with the girls before in terms of how people are really wanting that extra space for the work from home, because that still really is popular for people. I know a lot of people are going back into the office, but they're still working from home at least 1 or 2 days a week. So whether it's a study nook or just an extra bit of space there for that. But yeah, and again, it depends where you are as well. You know, we have the inner city suburbs, you know, the study nook in the 1-bedroom apartment might be really attractive, whereas if you go out to the larger suburbs where families are, it might be just a really easily maintainable yard, might be attractive for renters. So again, it just comes down to where you are and how you market the property, I think, is really important.
And knowing that market, and we do
absolutely
encouraging, like, investors, if you're looking to buy, you contact a property manager in that area. You ask them what are their ideal tenants. Like, we've got areas in Perth where if you have a shed, or if you're close to this school, like, you know, that's the perfect property. So knowing that is really, really important.
Yeah, like the outer suburbs, that side access for their caravans and boats is paramount.
Right.
And I like that you mentioned, you use the word business, you know, with investors. And I guess if you, as an investor watching, if you have a business, you have staffing, aka your property manager, and you have expenses. And as a business owner, you never whinge about sometimes you whinge about your expenses, but you have expenses, you expect them. So exactly the same as investors, you have expenses as a business owner of a portfolio. And if you can just have that mindset and not see maintenance and renovations and improvements as a negative, they're actually a positive. They're looking after your property, helping you sustain your property. It's not something that should be considered bad if you've.
I agree. Absolutely.
It also assists in keeping long-term tenants as well, instead of that turnover.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go over to, I've added a couple of questions that I'm throwing into to you guys. So hopefully I don't stump you. They're simple, it's okay. But I would like just to finish off with a question, which is, are you seeing investors make any mistakes, and probably particularly the interstate investors, so those ones that aren't maybe actually physically looking at it themselves, using a buyer's agent, using you know, someone, are you seeing any problems? Like, for example, we were seeing situations where people were rushing and then not viewing properties, and selling agents were advertising properties with old photos, and it causing a lot of problems, and that was a big mistake. So Jess, over to you. Like, are you seeing sort of anyone getting into trouble?
Just with the fees, our standard fee issue, they've gone with the cheaper agent. They've not seen the place. They've not had the experience, and they've just been stuck on our lovely conversation that we always get as property managers is fees. And it just still amazes me, the cheaper fees, cheaper agent and the cheaper fees, the best. And it's not, it's all about the whole process. So I've taken over some managements of some really cheap fees of late, and they've just not had the service, not had the experience, lack of reporting to them, lack of communication. They can't communicate with the property manager. So they've gone with a cheaper fee to start off with because they think that they're saving money, but it's actually costing them money in the long run. So that's one mistake that I see investors be fixated on, is the general table conversation about how much are your fees, you know, and, you know, can you do it at 4 or 5%? It's like, hang on a second, for $1.50 more or $3 more, you're going to get a lot better process and a person to manage your property. So yeah, I think for me of late, I'm not too sure about the girls, but me, I've seen some real shonky fee decision making, which has cost them more money. And these are from people that are overseas that I've seen, in Singapore, in the UK, interstate, obviously, that I've done some takeover managements of recently, and they're just taking the cheap run at the start, and it's not paid off.
And it's a lack of education for what our roles are and what we do and the service we offer. And I do always say that as an industry, us getting better at sort of showing our value is something really, really important. And that's on us. You know, if we take responsibility, that's on us to show that and to educate the clients. But as an investor watching, like, having that real understanding of business and the better position as an investor you're going to be in when you employ someone who pays their staff well, retains staff well, you know, trains their staff. There's so much more that you are going to get the benefit out of. And yeah, I mean, yeah, that's probably completely another topic for another day. We'll book in a half-day session to talk to everyone about that. But Kelly, what are you sort of seeing? Any sort of mistakes? Are they buying something that maybe they should have thought a bit better about?
I have had a couple of experiences over the last few months where investors have bought and not achieving the rent that I guess that they had based themselves on, or I'm quite often hearing, but the sales agent told me, okay, that's the first mistake, because their job is to sell you the property. Property manager's job is to manage your investment and advise you on what rent you're going to collect, what tenants that you're going to attract. So that's a big one that I've heard lately. And also, but my friend said, so I've had a couple of instances where I've been working with investors in my local area. They've been properties on larger lots, 40 plus years old properties, but they're referring to their friend who has a 2-year-old property in the western suburbs of Melbourne. So you're comparing apples and oranges sort of thing. So yeah, just talk to your property manager. They're the best people to speak to, and you can't go comparing your experiences with others that are not in the same boat, I guess.
And that's exactly what happens on Facebook groups.
Yes.
What about you, Vanessa? Any mistakes you make?
Yeah, I'm finding that. And look, I'm just, I guess it's, especially if you're interstate, you know, if you're here and viewing the property yourself before you purchase, it's a little bit different. But what I'm seeing is, and I guess that's a good thing with working with a PM or a buyer's agent, you know, I've done some inspections recently on behalf of people, and it's going in and the property's great, it's all freshly painted, but then, you know, you look up at the gutters and the roof and I'm like, why is it freshly painted? Are there going to be, there's mold, you know, and just not factoring in all of those little things when purchasing the property. So I think it's really important to have that conversation and have the property manager go through prior to you purchasing it. You know, for this one, I knew there was going to be a minimum $5,000-$6,000 worth of maintenance that would have caused big issues if they weren't done before they purchased. And so I think if you're jumping into that, and especially with older properties, you know, like Kelly mentioned, we have switchboard and electrical requirements. So as soon, it's going to come up as soon as we have those safety checks completed. Basically, we're going to have some of those done either way, and just factoring that into your numbers. It doesn't mean that they're not a good property to purchase. I just think investors need to be realistic when they are purchasing on what the outgoings are going to be initially.
Yep.
So that's what I'm finding.
Perfect. Now, if we can finish off with from each of you, if you were buying an investment property, I'd love to hear what your ideal budget would be and what sort of rental return or yield, you know, you'd be expecting. And feel free to share any little cheeky suburbs that you're finding there's been a bit of interest in with your buyer's agents or your referral networks as well. So Jess, let's start with you.
I think the number 4%, you know, 4 to 4.3% yield is obviously the golden number. We have seen some in the last 12 months go a 3.7 or a 3.9, and it's not a deal breaker, but sometimes you can be a little bit in the red. And like I talked about at the start, we are at a bit of a pressure point with these interest rate rises. So it is probably the biggest, toughest pinch right now with all of these loan repayments and all the new rental law changes. But I think 4% is sort of where you'd love it to sit, to feel a bit more comfortable and not as tight and painful when you're checking your landlord statements in case things come up. And for me, obviously, I'm in the north, so I love new builds. It's what I've been working on with Bias. I have had 21 years experience and seen every shape and size of different property, but I'm very fortunate right now to be working on a lot of new builds. Less maintenance, less stress. Yeah, and it's a beautiful way to manage property at the moment with some newer stock. It's just a nice feeling. The older stock is fantastic, but again, being very mindful of the changes. Upgrades of switchboards, which then could be appliance upgrades if there's a fault in the appliances. I had recently an oven that was working perfectly until we did the switchboard upgrade. Next minute, there was obviously a fault in the oven that we've never known about because the switchboard was always just working its normal way. So the investor then had to upgrade the oven. So yeah, older properties are great, but just be mindful of the numbers like Ness said. So, but for yields, you're at your 4.4, 4.5%, my lucky number. Yeah.
Amazing. What about you, Vanessa?
Yeah, I would be the same with Jess, especially if I'm looking at a house or a townhouse. I would expect apartments to yield higher, especially in the inner city ring, which I think if investors are looking at apartments, I think they would find those at the moment. I think they were one of the first ones for investors to sell out on. So, you know, I'm seeing apartments for sale in the city at the moment. You know, I'm talking 300, 400,000 for 1 or 2 bedrooms and going up. And, you know, for 380,000, you're getting close to $500 a week in rent. So I think it just depends on your strategy. Again, if you're in a self-managed super fund, but you want the return. But yeah, for me, I would be around the 4.5, and I'm finding there are a lot of suburbs that are coming up. There's, like all of us, we all sort of work around that inner north, northeast area, and there's still a lot of suburbs around that inner ring which are affordable. And, you know, your Reservoirs, your Thomastowns, Meadow Heights is one that keeps coming up. And then again, the further you go out is more greenfield estate as well. So western suburbs, always still affordable for everyone, but I think there are still in Melbourne, we're lucky enough to have some inner pockets around the inner city sort of ring, heading towards your outer, that's still quite affordable and has all the infrastructure there ready to go. So I would be looking at some of those.
Fabulous. And what about you, Kel?
I would say I'm going to talk about location. So a lot of investors that I've been working with of late, particularly interstate investors, locally, I'm finding investors have been put off with the media. Melbourne's getting a bit of a bad rap, so I'm dealing with a lot more interstate investors at the moment. Sweet spots, Broadmeadows, Dallas, Meadow Heights, Craigieburn, price point around that 6 to 650. Depending on whether you're wanting an older style property with a bigger land plot or something a bit more modern. I've done some figures. Broadmeadows has actually seen over the last 10 years a 48% growth on the median price. So if you're looking sort of on that fringe of regional suburbs like Beveridge, Wallan, even up to Kilmore, there's been a huge amount of renters coming to the area of Kilmore. Yeah, so that's probably the areas that I'd be looking in at the moment, or where I'm speaking to a lot of investors where money is coming in.
Yeah, excellent. We've hit our time limit, so I'll finish up. But I guess what I would love to remind people is that when you are buying a property and you are buying, directly with the sales agent, so not through a buyer's agent, the selling agent is there representing the seller and getting paid by the seller and really advocating for them. And what we find is that the investors who are just buying on their own don't have anyone to advocate for them. And so we do have a group. So these ladies are investor advocates. And so it's really important to have people on your team so that you can have someone to just support you, whether it's emotionally through the process of buying, can check these things, can make sure you understand the process, can make sure that you know, like if there is some, compliance that you might need to update, and just give you that heads up, because it's really important. And without the use of a good quality professional property manager, you just don't have that. And we have all seen many an investor really find themselves in trouble. I had one recently, it cost him $50,000 to bring the property up to scratch. And it's a shame to see that, and none of us want to see that with investors. So do make sure that if you are buying, that you reach out to one of these ladies. What I took away, which I love, was the importance of that infrastructure changing. I don't know what the infrastructure changes are, but if I was buying in Melbourne, I'd be reaching out to you guys and getting those tips. And again, you all work with a good volume of buyers agents and referral partners. So just knowing those trends and what's happening on the ground is just, it's priceless. So make sure that you do have someone on your team like these ladies when buying. And just as my summary that I've written on my notes is, mistakes that we're seeing. So don't fall into this trap of those cheaper fees, when the difference between a good quality property manager and a cheap agency is really only a couple of dollars probably a week. It's actually not a lot. So don't fall into that trap. Making sure that rent opinion you're getting is not based on what the sales agent's saying. It's based on what a property manager is recommending, and just factoring in that maintenance so that you don't have any surprises. So they are wonderful tips. I really appreciate your time. I'll just quickly check the messages. So Sarah has come on and said that there's more legislation changes coming to Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, is that a good thing or a...
It's how you want to deal with it. I tend to not jump up and down with legislation. It is what it is. It's just more black and white. And I've worked across a number of different states, and you'll find that most of the states follow each other in suit one way or another over the years. And I'd be more worried and more looking into what your property manager is doing to make sure it doesn't affect you. And having that conversation. I know all of us have our strategies in place to minimize any effect to our owners, because it is what it is. And, you know, it's like Queensland recently changing to 1 rent increase per year, where we've had that, you know, it all sort of goes in. We're about to bring in some that are similar to New South Wales. So while everyone loves to jump up and down, it's
education.
It's just education and implementing strategies to make sure, you know, our owners aren't affected negatively. So
yeah, absolutely. And I've just had Maggie jump in to say, please give the real estate names the ladies work for and how to contact them. So I'll let you ladies answer that. So Kel.
Mark's Property Specialist is my business name. Google, you will find our website, Facebook page, Instagram, LinkedIn, maybe even TikTok, you might find me.
Vanessa?
Yeah, so I am Northern Avenue Property, again on Google. Same. Vanessa Pierce is my name. LinkedIn or Melbourne Property Manager is what I go by on Instagram. So I am there all over.
And Jess?
Yeah, so my agency is called Bias Property. You'll find me on Google, also on Instagram with my name, Jess Ross at Bias Property. And yeah, happy to help, and yeah, look forward to connecting with some investors.
Fabulous. And final message from Sarah. Well done, ladies. Huge value and leading the way in Melbourne, which you certainly are. So thank you for your time. I will make sure this replay is accessible. So anyone that's watching, if you have a friend or a family member that is wanting to also take or watch this, then you can still use the link and you'll receive the on-demand replay, which is great. And make sure you connect with these ladies on their socials, because they do post regularly with what is happening in Melbourne and will be very accommodating with any questions you have. Thank you, ladies. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ash. Thank you.
See you.
Bye.